The morning mist clung to the scarred landscape of northeastern France, like a shroud over the dead. Lieutenant Colonel George Patton pressed his field glasses to his eyes, studying the German trenches that snaked across the Argonne forest like infected wounds in the earth. It was September 26, 1918, and in less than 3 hours, over 1 million American soldiers would launch the largest offensive in United States military history. "Sir, the artillery barrage begins in 10 minutes, whispered Sergeant William Murphy, his voice barely audible above the distant rumble of German shells. Patton lowered his glasses, his jaw set with grim determination. After months of preparation, the American Expeditionary Force under General John Pershing was finally ready to prove itself against the battle-hardened German Fourth Army. The Meuse-Argonne sector stretched 47 miles from the Meuse River in the east to the Argonne forest in the west. This wasn't just another offensive. It was America's chance to break the stalemate that had consumed Europe for 4 bloody years. The German army had fortified this region with 3 defensive lines, each more formidable than the last, protected by machine gun nests, barbed wire, and artillery positions that commanded every approach. At precisely 5:30 in the morning, the earth erupted in thunder. 2,700 American guns opened fire simultaneously, their shells screaming across no man's land to pound German positions. The barrage was so intense that soldiers 20 miles away felt the ground shake beneath their feet. Private Daniel Hayes of the 1st Division pressed his helmet tight against his head as dirt and debris rained down around his trench. "This is it, boys," he shouted to his squad. "We're going over the top in 3 hours." The statistics of the coming battle were staggering. General Pershing had assembled the 1st American Army, consisting of 9 divisions for the initial assault, with 13 more in reserve. They faced the German Fourth Army, commanded by General Friedrich von Lossberg, who had earned his reputation as the master of defensive warfare during the battles of the Somme and Verdun. According to military historian Edward Lengel's analysis, published in the Smithsonian Magazine, the Meuse-Argonne offensive would become the deadliest battle in American history, with casualties exceeding those of any other single engagement before or since. The Americans knew they were walking into a nightmare of steel and fire, but they also knew that victory here could end the war. As the artillery barrage continued, Major Charles Whittlesey of the 77th Division studied his maps one final time. His battalion would advance through the Argonne forest, where every tree could hide a German sniper, and every hollow could conceal a machine gun nest. The forest had been turned into a fortress, with concrete bunkers hidden among the twisted oaks, and interlocking fields of fire that could cut down entire companies in minutes. Captain Edward Allworth of the 89th Division checked his watch, 8:15. In 10 minutes, the barrage would lift, and the greatest test in American military history would begin. Around him, thousands of young American soldiers, farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, immigrants from New York's Lower East, sighed, prepared to charge into the inferno that awaited them beyond the trenches. The fate of the war, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance as America prepared to prove itself on the battlefields of France. At 8:30 sharp on September 26, 1918, the American artillery barrage lifted like a curtain rising on a tragedy. Along a 20-mile front, American soldiers climbed out of their trenches and walked into the teeth of German machine gun fire. The Meuse-Argonne offensive had begun. Private First Class Samuel Woodfill of the 5th Division was among the first to go over the top. As he advanced across the shell-torn ground toward the German lines, machine gun bullets buzzed past his ears like angry hornets. To his left, he saw Private Johnson from Ohio stumble and fall, clutching his chest. To his right, Corporal Martinez from Texas crumpled as a sniper's bullet found its mark. But Woodfill kept moving forward, his Springfield rifle ready, driven by a mixture of terror and determination that would later earn him the Medal of Honor. The initial assault achieved mixed results. The 1st Division, attacking on the right, flanked near the Meuse River, made steady progress against lighter German resistance. Their experienced troops, veterans of Cantigny and Soissons, advanced nearly 3 miles before encountering serious opposition. But in the center and left sectors, where the 35th and 77th Divisions attacked through the dense Argonne forest, the story was dramatically different. Major Charles Whittlesey's battalion of the 77th Division found themselves trapped in a nightmare of interlocking machine gun positions. German defenders, well concealed in concrete bunkers, waited until the Americans were within 50 yards before opening fire. Whittlesey watched helplessly as his first wave melted away under the devastating crossfire. "Take cover," he shouted, diving behind a fallen log as bullets splintered the bark above his head. "We need to flank those positions." The German defense was masterful in its brutality. General Friedrich von Lossberg had positioned his troops in depth, with the front lines held by expendable units while his best troops waited in the second and third defensive positions. Machine gun crews, armed with the deadly Maxim guns, had been carefully positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. When the Americans advanced, they walked into a carefully orchestrated killing field. By noon, American casualties were mounting, at an alarming rate. The 35th Division, composed largely of National Guard units from Missouri and Kansas, suffered particularly heavy losses. These men, many of whom had been civilians just months earlier, found themselves facing veteran German troops who had been fighting for 4 years. Company after company was cut down as they attempted to advance through the tangled undergrowth of the Argonne forest. According to the detailed account published in Military History magazine by historian Robert Farrell, the first day's casualties exceeded expectations by nearly 300%, with some units losing over half their men in the initial assault. The reality of modern warfare was proving far more deadly than American planners had anticipated. Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, America's ace pilot, flew reconnaissance missions over the battlefield and reported scenes of carnage that shocked even veteran observers. "The forest floor was carpeted with American dead," he wrote in his memoir. "Our boys were walking into machine gun nests that had been prepared for months. It was slaughter on a scale I had never witnessed." As darkness fell on September 26th, the American advance had stalled. Instead of the planned 6-mile breakthrough, most units had advanced less than 2 miles. The First American Army had suffered over 9,000 casualties in a single day, more than any previous American battle. But General Pershing remained committed to the offensive. "We will continue the attack," he declared at his headquarters that evening. "The fate of the alliance depends upon American success." In the German trenches, Colonel Wilhelm Reinhard of the 5th Bavarian Reserve Division surveyed the day's carnage with grim satisfaction. His men had held their positions despite overwhelming American numbers and artillery support. But he knew this was only the beginning. The Americans would keep coming, and his depleted forces might not withstand another major assault. The stage was set for 47 days of the most intensive fighting in American military history. October 1st, 1918, dawned gray and cold over the Argonne forest. 5 days into the offensive, the American advance had ground to a bloody halt against the second German defensive line. What military strategists had hoped would be a rapid breakthrough had become a deadly war of attrition that was consuming entire divisions. Major Charles Whittlesey crouched in a shell crater, studying his remaining men through the morning mist. Of the 600 soldiers in his battalion who had attacked on September 26th, fewer than 200 remained combat effective. They had advanced just over a mile through the forest, but at a cost that made victory feel like defeat. Now, surrounded by German positions and cut off from resupply, Whittlesey's men were about to become legends. "Sir, we've lost contact with headquarters," reported Sergeant Carl Wilhelm, crawling up beside his commander. "The Germans have moved back into positions behind us. We're completely surrounded." Whittlesey nodded grimly. His battalion had become what would later be known as the Lost Battalion, though they were neither lost nor a full battalion. They knew exactly where they were, trapped in a pocket of hell with German machine guns covering every avenue of escape. The situation was repeated across the entire front. American units found themselves isolated in small pockets, surrounded by German positions that had been bypassed during the initial assault but not eliminated. The dense forest canopy made coordination nearly impossible, and radio communications frequently failed due to German jamming and the thick vegetation. Private First Class Samuel Woodfill, who had survived the first day's assault, now found himself leading a squad through a maze of German bunkers near the village of Cunel. Armed only with his rifle and a handful of grenades, Woodfill had already destroyed 3 machine gun positions single-handedly. As reported in the detailed account by military historian Edward Kaufman in The War to End All Wars, Woodfill's actions on this day would earn him recognition as one of America's greatest World War I heroes. "There's another nest about 50 yards ahead," whispered Corporal Johnson, pointing toward a concrete emplacement barely visible among the trees. Woodfill studied the position carefully. He could see the distinctive muzzle of a Maxim machine, gun protruding from a firing slit. One wrong move and his entire squad would be cut down, but the position had to be eliminated if they were to continue their advance. Meanwhile, in the skies above the battlefield, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker was engaged in aerial combat with German fighters attempting to provide reconnaissance for their ground forces. The air war over the Meuse Argonne was as fierce as the ground fighting, with American pilots of the 94th Aero Squadron battling experienced German aces for control of the airspace. Rickenbacker's detailed observations of the battlefield from above provided crucial intelligence to American commanders struggling to coordinate their scattered forces. The German defenders were fighting with the desperation of men who knew defeat meant the end of everything they had fought for. Captain Hans Müller of the 2nd Bavarian Regiment had been defending the same trench line for 3 days, repelling attack after attack by American forces. His machine gun crews were exhausted, their ammunition running low, but they continued to exact a terrible toll on the advancing Americans. "They keep coming," Müller wrote in his diary, later captured by American forces. "These Americans fight with a fury I have not seen since the early days of the war. They are inexperienced but fearless, and their numbers seem endless. We cannot hold much longer." The toll on both sides was staggering. American casualties by October 1st had exceeded 26,000 men, while German losses, though smaller in absolute numbers, represented a higher percentage of available forces. Entire American companies had been reduced to squad strength, while German regiments that had begun the battle at full strength were now shadows of their former selves. General John Pershing, under enormous pressure from Allied commanders to achieve a breakthrough, ordered the offensive to continue despite the mounting casualties. "We must break through," he declared at a staff meeting on October 2nd. "The enemy is weakening, and one more push may collapse their entire line." But in the trenches and forests of the Argonne, American soldiers wondered if anyone in headquarters truly understood the hell they were enduring. As night fell on October 2nd, the lost battalion prepared for another night of German attacks, unaware that their courage would inspire a nation. October 4th, 1918, Major Charles Whittlesey pressed his back against the earthen wall of his makeshift command post, listening to the whistle of incoming German artillery shells. For 3 days, his lost battalion had been completely surrounded in a small pocket, the Argonne forest, enduring constant attacks while their ammunition and medical supplies dwindled to nothing. "Major, we've got wounded men who won't make it another day without medical attention," reported Sergeant Carl Wilhelm, his uniform torn and blood-stained from carrying injured soldiers to safety. Around them, fewer than 190. Men remained from the original 550 who had advanced into this wooded hell. They had eaten their last rations the previous day, and water was becoming critically scarce. The lost battalion's position was strategically important, but tactically impossible. They occupied a small ravine that controlled a key intersection of forest paths, preventing German reinforcements from moving freely through the sector. But their advanced position, originally intended as a springboard for further attacks, had become a death trap when supporting units failed to advance alongside them. Private Abe Krotoshinsky, a former New York City postal worker, volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. "I'll try to get through to headquarters," he told Whittlesey. "Maybe they can get us some support." The young soldier crawled out of the ravine under cover of darkness, beginning a harrowing journey through German-held territory that would take him 18 hours and earn him a place in military legend. The German attacks intensified as dawn broke on October 5th. Colonel Wilhelm Reinhard had positioned 3 companies around the American pocket, supported by artillery and machine guns. He knew that eliminating this stubborn American force would free up significant resources for defending against the main American offensive. "We must crush them today," he ordered his battalion commanders. "They are like a thorn in our side." According to the comprehensive account published in American Heritage magazine by historian Robert H. Farrell, the Lost Battalion's resistance became a symbol of American determination that resonated far beyond the battlefield. News of their desperate stand reached newspaper headlines across America, where families anxiously followed reports of the surrounded soldiers. The fighting reached its climax when German forces launched a coordinated assault from 3 directions. Private First Class Charles McMurtry, second in command to Whittlesey, organized the defense with tactical brilliance that belied his civilian background as a Wall Street lawyer. "Hold your fire until they're within 50 yards, he commanded. His scattered riflemen, "Make every shot count, we can't afford to waste ammunition." The American defenders, though vastly outnumbered, possessed superior marksmanship training and the Springfield Model 1903 rifle, which proved devastatingly effective in the close-quarters forest fighting. German soldiers advancing through the underbrush presented clear targets to American marksmen, who had trained extensively in rapid-fire techniques. But it was Private Krotoshinsky's incredible journey that ultimately saved the Lost Battalion. After crawling, running, and hiding for nearly 20 hours, he reached American lines with Whittlesey's desperate message requesting immediate artillery support and relief forces. His detailed report of German positions allowed American gunners to target enemy concentrations with devastating accuracy. The relief came just as the Lost Battalion's situation had become hopeless. Elements of the 77th Division's 154th Infantry Regiment fought their way through German positions, supported by accurate artillery fire directed by Krotoshinsky's intelligence. The sound of American voices calling, "Over here! We're Americans!" brought tears to the eyes of Whittlesey's exhausted survivors. When the relief force finally reached the ravine on October 7th, they found a scene that would haunt them forever. The ground was littered with empty cartridge cases and blood-stained bandages. Of the 550 men who had entered the pocket 5 days earlier, only 194 walked out under their own power. Many bore wounds that would never fully heal, but their spirits remained unbroken. "We held," was all Major Whittlesey said when asked to describe the ordeal. His simple words captured the essence of American determination that would ultimately prove decisive in the Meuse-Argonne campaign. The Lost Battalion had become a symbol of sacrifice and courage that inspired American forces throughout the remaining weeks of the offensive. Their stand had also accomplished its strategic purpose. German forces that might have reinforced other sectors were tied down in futile attacks against the surrounded Americans, contributing to the overall weakening of enemy defenses that would soon lead to breakthrough. October 12th, 1918. The autumn rain fell steadily on the scarred landscape of the Meuse-Argonne sector, turning the shell-torn earth into a quagmire of mud and blood. General John Pershing stood in his forward command post near Sully, studying the battle maps that showed American forces finally beginning to penetrate the second German defensive line after 2.5 weeks of brutal fighting. "Sir, the 1st Division has broken through near Flevel," reported Colonel Hugh Drum, Pershing's chief of staff. "They've advanced nearly 2 miles since dawn and are approaching the 3rd defensive line." Pershing nodded grimly, knowing that the breakthrough had cost his army over 45,000 casualties, more than any previous American battle in history. The German resistance was beginning to crack under the relentless pressure. General Friedrich von Lossberg, the master of defensive warfare, found his carefully prepared positions overwhelmed by the sheer weight of American numbers and improved tactics. His 4th Army had been bled white over the past 16 days, with some regiments reduced to company strength and others completely dissolved under the American onslaught. Captain Harry Truman, commanding Battery D of the 129th Field Artillery Regiment, had witnessed the gradual improvement in American performance since the disastrous first day. "Our boys are learning," he wrote to his fiancée Bess Wallace back in Missouri. The Green troops who stumbled into machine gun nests 2 weeks ago are now seasoned veterans who know how to coordinate infantry and artillery attacks. The transformation of the American Expeditionary Force was remarkable. Units that had suffered devastating casualties in the opening days had been rebuilt with replacement troops who learned from the bitter lessons of their predecessors. New tactics emerged from the blood-soaked forests, small unit infiltration techniques, improved artillery coordination, and combined arms attacks that finally began to crack the German defensive system. Private First Class Samuel Woodfill now, leading a full platoon after being promoted for his extraordinary heroism, exemplified the new American fighting spirit. On October 13th, his unit encountered a series of German machine gun positions defending the village of Cunel. Instead of the frontal assaults that had characterized the early fighting, Woodfill coordinated a complex flanking movement that eliminated 5 enemy positions with minimal American casualties. According to military historian John Eisenhower's analysis published in World War I magazine, the period from October 10th to 15th marked the turning point of the Meuse-Argonne offensive. American forces finally achieved the tactical proficiency necessary to overcome German defensive advantages, while enemy resistance began to collapse under the cumulative effects of weeks of continuous combat. The breakthrough came on October 14th when the 1st and 42nd Divisions, attacking in coordination, finally penetrated the Hindenburg Line, Germany's supposedly impregnable third defensive position. The attack began at dawn, with a devastating artillery barrage that had been carefully planned using intelligence gathered from previous assaults. Unlike the opening day's bombardment, this barrage was precisely targeted on known German positions and lasted exactly long enough to suppress defenders without giving them time to recover. Colonel Douglas MacArthur, commanding the 84th Infantry Brigade of the 42nd Rainbow Division, led his men through the gap created by the artillery. "Follow me," he shouted, his distinctive cap and riding crop making him a conspicuous target as he advanced across no man's land. MacArthur's fearless leadership inspired his troops to push forward despite heavy casualties, ultimately securing the village of Châtillon and opening a crucial gap in German defenses. The psychological impact of breaking the Hindenburg Line was immense. German soldiers who had been told that this position was impregnable began to lose faith in their ability to stop the American advance. Desertions increased dramatically, with entire units abandoning their positions during the night, rather than face another day of American attacks. General Max von Bain, commanding the German Army Group, sent an urgent telegram to Berlin on October 15th. "American pressure has become unbearable. Our losses exceed replacement capacity, and morale is collapsing. Recommend immediate consideration of armistice negotiations before complete military collapse becomes inevitable." As American forces consolidated their breakthrough positions, they found evidence of the enemy's growing desperation. German trenches were littered with abandoned equipment, and captured documents revealed plans for a general withdrawal to positions behind the Meuse River. The tide of battle had finally turned in America's favor. The price of victory had been staggering, but the end was finally in sight. October 28, 1918. The morning fog lifted slowly from the Meuse River Valley, revealing American soldiers advancing across open ground that had been impassable German stronghold just weeks before. Lieutenant Colonel George Patton, recovering from wounds received earlier in the offensive, watched from his hospital bed as reports arrived describing the collapse of German resistance along the entire Meuse-Argonne front. "The Boche are running," announced Major General Charles Summerall, commanding the 1st Division, to his assembled staff officers. "Our scouts report German troops streaming northward in full retreat. This is what we've been fighting for, the complete breakdown of enemy defenses." After 32 days of the bloodiest fighting in American history, the German army was finally breaking. The transformation of the battlefield was remarkable. Areas that had cost thousands of American lives to capture in September were now being abandoned by German forces without a fight. The village of Grandpré, which had withstood weeks of assault, was occupied by American patrols on October 27th, after its defenders withdrew during the night. The strategic heights of the Argonne forest, where so many American soldiers had died among the trees, were finally in American hands. Private Alvin York of the 82nd Division had become the most famous American soldier of the war after his incredible feat on October 8th, when he single-handedly captured 132 German prisoners near the village of Châtel-Chehery. As reported in the Saturday Evening Post by war correspondent George Patullo, York's actions exemplified the transformation of American forces from inexperienced recruits to battle-hardened veterans, capable of extraordinary achievements. "I was just doing my duty," York modestly explained when questioned about his remarkable day. The Tennessee mountain man had used his exceptional marksmanship skills, honed by years of hunting in the Cumberland Mountains, to eliminate German machine gun positions that were holding up his battalion's advance. His religious convictions and humble demeanor made him a perfect symbol of American values triumphing over Prussian militarism. The German retreat was becoming a rout. General Friedrich von Lossberg, who had defended the sector so brilliantly for over a month, received orders on October 29th to conduct a fighting withdrawal to the Antwerp-Meuse line. His Fourth Army, which had begun the battle with over 100,000 men, could now field fewer than 30,000 combat-effective soldiers. The rest had been killed, wounded, or captured in the relentless American attacks. Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, now America's leading ace with 26 confirmed victories, flew reconnaissance missions over the retreating German columns. "The roads are clogged with enemy transport moving north," he reported to headquarters. "Their retreat is becoming increasingly disorganized. Our pilots are having tremendous success in strafing attacks against defenseless targets." The human cost of the Meuse-Argonne offensive was staggering. American casualties exceeded 117,000 men, including 26,000 dead, making it the deadliest battle in United States history. But the strategic results justified the sacrifice. The German army's defensive capabilities had been shattered, and their morale had collapsed beyond recovery. General John Pershing, reviewing casualty reports at his headquarters, felt the weight of command more heavily than ever before. "Every one of these numbers represents a young American who will never see home again," he confided to his aide. "But their sacrifice has brought us to the threshold of victory. Germany cannot continue this war much longer." Intelligence reports confirmed Pershing's assessment. Intercepted German communications revealed a military organization in complete disarray. Units were abandoning their positions without orders, officers were deserting their commands, and civilian morale on the German home front had collapsed entirely. The German high command was frantically seeking a way to end the war before their army disintegrated completely. On November 1st, the American First Army launched what would be the final phase of the offensive. Instead of the grinding attritional battles that had characterized the previous month, American forces now advanced rapidly against minimal resistance. The 1st Division covered 12 miles in a single day, more than they had advanced in the entire first week of the battle. The end was approaching faster than anyone had dared hope. German plenipotentiaries were already en route to negotiate. Armistice terms and Kaiser Wilhelm's abdication was imminent. The Meuse-Argonne offensive, America's greatest military effort of World War I, had achieved its ultimate objective, the complete defeat of German military power. But the cost would be remembered forever in American military history. November 11th, 1918, 5:59 in the morning. Along the entire Meuse-Argonne front, an unprecedented silence settled over the battlefield as American artillery crews received the order to cease fire. After 47 days of continuous combat, the greatest battle in American military history was ending, not with a final dramatic assault, but with the simple absence of gunfire that had become the constant soundtrack of death. General John Pershing, stood in his command post at Souilly, reviewing the final casualty reports that would forever define the Meuse-Argonne offensive. 117,000 American casualties, 26,000 dead. Entire divisions reduced to skeleton strength. Small towns across America that would never recover from the loss of their young men. The price of victory had been paid in American blood on an unprecedented scale. "Sir, the armistice takes effect at 11 o'clock, reported Colonel Hugh Drum, his voice barely containing the emotion they all felt. Pershing nodded solemnly, knowing that in 6 hours the guns would fall silent forever. But for the thousands of American families who would receive telegram notifications in the coming weeks, the war would never truly end. Private First Class Samuel Woodfill, now wearing the Medal of Honor earned through his extraordinary heroism, sat with his surviving squad mates in a shell crater near the village of Cunel. They had advanced over 20 miles from their starting positions on September 26th, but the journey had consumed most of their friends. Of the 200 men in Woodfill's company who had gone over the top on that first morning, fewer than 30 remained physically whole. "It's over," whispered Corporal Johnson, hardly daring to believe the words. Around them, the landscape bore witness to the incredible destruction of modern warfare. The Argonne forest, once a pristine woodland, had been reduced to splintered stumps and shell holes. Villages that had stood for centuries were nothing but rubble. The earth itself seemed wounded beyond healing. Major Charles Whittlesey, hero of the Lost Battalion, reflected on the transformation his men had undergone during their terrible ordeal. The New York National Guard regiment that had entered the battle consisted largely of immigrants and working-class Americans who had been dismissed by professional soldiers as inferior material. But they had proven their courage in the crucible of combat, earning respect through sacrifice that could never be questioned. According to the comprehensive analysis published in the Journal of Military History by historian Edward M. Kaufman, the Meuse-Argonne offensive had accomplished far more than its immediate tactical objectives. It had forged the modern United States Army, transforming American military doctrine and establishing the organizational foundations that would serve the nation through 2 world wars and beyond. The strategic results were undeniable. The German Fourth Army had been completely destroyed as an effective fighting force. The critical Sedan-Mézières railway line, which supplied German forces along the entire Western Front, was now within range of American artillery. Most importantly, the offensive had demonstrated to both allies and enemies that American military power had reached maturity on the battlefields of Europe. Captain Harry Truman, commanding Battery D of the 129th Field Artillery, fired the final American artillery round of World War I at 10:59 and 50 seconds, just 10 seconds before the armistice took effect. Years later, as President of the United States, he would remember that moment as a symbol of American determination to see difficult tasks through to completion, regardless of cost. At exactly 11 o'clock on November 11th, 1918, an extraordinary silence descended over the battlefield. American soldiers emerged cautiously from their positions, hardly believing that the deadly game of war had suddenly ended. Some wept openly, others simply sat in stunned silence, trying to process the reality that they had survived when so many of their friends had not. The Meuse-Argonne offensive had achieved its ultimate objective, the complete defeat of German military power and the end of World War I. But the victory belonged as much to the dead as to the living. In American military cemeteries throughout France, thousands of white crosses marked the graves of young men who had given their lives to prove that democracy could triumph over militarism. General Pershing's final order to the American Expeditionary Force captured both the triumph and the tragedy of the moment. The cessation of operations by no means relieves commanders and staffs of responsibility for vigilant performance of duty. The enemy is not defeated in spirit, and should hostilities be resumed, we must be ready to continue operations with the same energy that has characterized our efforts in the past. The Meuse-Argonne offensive was over, but its lessons would echo through American military history forever. The citizen soldiers who had entered the battle as inexperienced volunteers had emerged as the finest fighting force in the world, having paid the ultimate price to earn that distinction. Their sacrifice had not only won a war, but had established America as a global military power. In the silence that followed the guns, America remembered its dead and honored their sacrifice with a commitment to never forget the price of freedom.